I'm going to be talking about legal recruitment coordinators and the role that they have in the hiring process. And this is actually a very important presentation because recruiting coordinators have absolutely a ton of, let me just make sure there's something here I was trying to close. I just see here. Sorry, just give me 1 second here. Ton of power in terms of whether or not you get hired. And in many cases, they're the most important component for you getting hired in terms of many things. And I think that a lot of times people don't understand that attorneys and younger attorneys don't really understand how important they are and how crucial they are and how much work they do in terms of everything that's involved in the hiring process. So I'm going to talk about that today and in quite a bit of depth. And then after I'm done talking about that, we'll take as many questions as people have. But this will probably be the only presentation that anyone ever watches about legal recruiting coordinators. And it's just a very important one to understand. And it can help you. It will help you get hired. It will help you hold on to jobs. And it will, for many of you, it may actually make you interested in the profession because I think it's a fascinating profession and something that a lot of attorneys actually choose to do and become very happy doing. They're really the central piece of the puzzle in most law firms, and a lot of what they do is misunderstood. And when I was practicing law, I didn't always understand what they did. And there's an article that I have done related to it, but I'll also talk about how the article a little bit, and then I'll talk about some other ideas. The first thing is in terms of the history of legal recruiting coordinators and the position. And the history is important to understand because of the role that they fill and the reason that they're there. And historically, law firms actually didn't have recruiting coordinators. They had hiring partners. And honestly, the recruiting coordinator is a much newer role than the hiring partner. They've been hiring partners been around for over 100 years. But in terms of the legal recruiting role, that is actually a relatively new role. And today, a lot of smaller to mid-sized firms don't have legal recruiting coordinators, and most law firms have them when they grow in size and stature. So if you're writing to a legal recruiting coordinator inside of a firm, the odds are pretty good that it's an important firm, and there's a reason for that position. The position started in the early 1980s and then became very popular in the middle of the 1980s. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of lateral hiring. People would join a law firm and stay there in most cases until they either went in-house or for their whole careers. And as people started lateraling, and that became much more popular, and then the legal recruiting role became a much more popular one. And what happened in the mid 1980s as law firms started expanding, and as they started expanding, they started luring people from other firms and really growing to reflect the larger U.S. companies, and U.S. companies were getting larger, and law firms started getting larger. And that started working. So what happened is law firms started the legal recruiting coordination position because what happened is as they started working with recruiters and the firms started growing and hiring laterally, a lot of times they were working with recruiters, and recruiters would always talk to the hiring partners about different positions, and they would get close to them and start recruiting them away. And so that was something that the firms didn't like. And it was actually very funny. The legal recruiting coordinator role was actually created because law firms wanted to protect their hiring partners from getting recruited away in many cases by recruiters. And as law firms grew, they started realizing that it took a lot of attorney time to talk to recruiters and to people and so forth. And the legal recruiting coordinator role started. And there was a lot of turnover among the attorneys that were talking to legal recruiters. And so the legal recruiting coordinator's role sort of became as a gatekeeper. And you may notice today, like even legal recruiting coordinators tend to be very angry if you contact partners directly. They don't want you going around them. And then if you do, they want to be circled in. And they're very territorial with that because their job really is to protect, in many cases, the partners in the firm from recruiters, or to make them able so they can be productive and put their work towards billing a lot of hours or bringing in clients and not necessarily working with the candidates that are coming in the door. So recruiting coordinators in the larger to mid-sized firms really do want everything to go through them because their role really is to protect the productivity of the partners and to make sure that everybody knows what's going on in the process. And so the recruiting coordinator role was born. And the first reason, obviously, is because they didn't want anybody recruited away. So they didn't want their people recruited away. And they also wanted to free up more time for the hiring partner and other people to do work. And that's really what you need to understand, is that the legal recruiting coordinator today is a gatekeeper that protects the productivity of the firm. It enables them to centralize all those activities, and then it also prevents attorneys from being recruited away. And it's actually a good idea. It's funny because part of my job, I deal with hiring partners all the time, and sometimes firms are lax in making sure that the hiring partners don't deal with recruiters. And when I'm talking to hiring partners, I mean, I would say 20 to 30% of the time, if I have several conversations with them, they always ask me what different opportunities are for them. And I always steer the conversation towards them, which is funny. Now, it doesn't happen everywhere, but if I form a good relationship with them, that will typically happen. So it is smart for law firms to have recruiting coordinators, and you need to understand the role really is a very important gatekeeper. And as a gatekeeper, the last person you ever want to upset in the recruiting process is that gatekeeper. And then other things happened. The role grew as law firms moved from lockstep compensation systems to eat what you kill compensation. In smaller firms, the role may not take a lot of time, but if a law firm is compensated, or the people that are compensated based on how much money they're bringing in and so forth, and their billable hours, then it's really not a job that they want to do. In lockstep compensation systems, what happens is people start out at one salary as a partner, and then they move up in their salary as time goes by. And that was a very common model in the past, but now most law firms compensate partners based on the amount of business they're bringing in. So the last thing those partners want to do is spend time talking to law students and attorneys. They don't really want to do recruiting, and certainly that they don't want to review resumes, schedule interviews, and do all this sort of stuff and those type of arrangements. They just want to be in a position where they can be productive. And a lot of times, the best attorneys do not want to be hiring partners because it takes just too much time, and it's time so that they could use for other things. Initially, the role of a recruiting coordinator was a lot of times a hiring partner would have their secretary help out with that, but you can imagine like how demanding it is. They have to schedule interviews, they have to send out rejection letters, they have to answer calls, they have to place advertisements in newspapers and now online. And many smaller firms still rely on that, but for the most part, the legal recruiting coordinator has been very professionalized. They have their own conferences. They're on webinars like this and learning. They're doing continuing education. They know the attorneys in the firm very well. They know the kind of work they do. And it's really become a profession, and it's a serious profession. In some firms that I know of, just to give you an understanding of how important it is, the recruiting coordinators, the people that are in charge of that for the firms, they have people that do it nationally and so forth. A lot of cases, they make more than some partners in the firms. The role can actually be very highly compensated. Now, they may call them a legal recruiting manager or something along those lines, but it is a very highly compensated role in a lot of firms. And the larger the firm and the more responsibility the person does, the better. So it's a place where, if it's a job that you were interested in, where you could actually have a very good career in the right firm if you were to do it. So over time, secretaries, assistants, and other non-professionals that were assisting hiring partners, that job became more specialized. And in the largest firms, the recruiting coordinators tend to understand very well what the firm's needs are, what the attorneys can do. And it's just become a very essential and important role in most firms. And it's a profession. There are a lot of non-practicing attorneys doing it, but some of the people are former attorneys, and a lot of them are former big law firm partners, and they often work very hard. Some of them work as hard as the attorneys, and they can make very good money. So it's a very serious job. And a lot of times when law students and young attorneys are talking to recruiting coordinators, they don't give them the same deference sometimes that they might give an attorney, which is very stupid, because they really have a lot of say in what happens in your career. And because a lot of times even attorneys don't want to make the decisions because they're too busy practicing law, they rely upon the legal recruiting coordinators to decide who to hire and to make hiring decisions. And it can be a very important job, and something that you really don't want to take for granted. There's a huge volume of applications that come into a lot of large firms. There's a lot of scheduling, there's offer letters, rejections, there's being able to read resumes and understand what makes a good attorney and a bad attorney, what makes someone in a certain practice area desirable versus not desirable. And it really is a form of legal practice, and it's a skill. And a lot of environments do not reward that skill in their attorneys, and so they hire very good legal recruiting coordinators to do that. And I've been amazed at the salary some of them make. Some of them I've seen ones that are making several $100,000 a year doing the job they did some big firms. So it can be a very lucrative profession, and it can also have a lot of responsibility. And it's a serious job in all respects. And for law firms that are considering hiring legal recruiters, legal coordinators, it's usually just an amazing investment because it frees up their attorneys' time. They can bring in better attorneys. The right attorney, legal recruiting coordinators know the type of people that the law firm wants. They'll be able to make cultural fits. They'll be able to network with the right people, and they'll also give a very professional experience to people that are joining the firm. Okay, so what do legal recruiting coordinators do? This is, now that you kind of have an understanding of the importance of the role, I'd like to tell you some of the tasks that they do and why these tasks are important. And they really are multitasking and doing quite a bit of work. The first thing is they have to constantly work with attorneys in the firm to decide on their needs. And one of their main jobs is they'll sit in hiring meetings, they'll get requests from people to hire certain people. They will be in growth mode sometimes, or sometimes they will be in cutting back mode. And so the recruiting coordinator really has their pulse on the firm, unlike a lot of people even working there, including associates and even partners. They know what the needs of the firm are at various points in time. They may know who's in trouble in their job. They know who's doing well. They know partners that are bringing in business, but the big thing is that they're responsible for the bringing in talent, which is how law firms make money. So they're really in that role, which is an extremely important role. And obviously, if a law firm doesn't have enough people, then it's not doing as much work as it should, and its profitability will suffer. If it hires too many people, then it will suffer as well because it will be paying salaries of people that they're not keeping busy, and then morale will be low. So the recruiting coordinator is sitting there in the middle of all this and watching these inputs and hearing from attorneys that want people. They're hearing other people that have budgets. They're hearing they can hire for certain attorneys and other attorneys, certain departments and other departments, and they're the central repository of all this information. And it's almost like in many cases, like having the role of a CEO, because they're understanding and getting so much information coming at them to help them make decisions. And so their job is to really understand all that information and help the firm. And sometimes they have to make decisions based on, they'll know gaps that they may have in the firm in terms of people that may have left. They may have practice areas may be slowing down and they don't want to hire there. The firm may be refocusing or letting associates go in certain practice areas. So the thing is, recruiting coordinator sitting there, and people are calling them all day long. Recruiters, attorneys are sending them resumes, and they're getting all these inputs. And so they're actually able to make decisions about, should I send this resume to someone? Should I show this resume to someone? What should I do with this? And so they're making these decisions, and they're very important decisions. And if that recruiting coordinator likes you, then they're more likely to get involved and interrupt people. They may say, if they hear that a big case came in, for example, in a certain practice area, say it's ERISA litigation, and they see an ERISA resume, even though the firm doesn't technically have an opening for an ERISA litigator, if they see a resume come in, something that they would otherwise not do anything with because the firm is not hiring, they may forward it to the right people and get it looked at and that person hired. So they have a tremendous amount of power. And they can also be making decisions about, they know if someone's leaving in the future, and then they have a resume that they keep on hold. And so all these sorts of decisions, they're working with the firm to understand the hiring needs. And law firms will constantly be letting certain people go. And in other cases, the recruiting coordinator may help them hire contracting staff attorneys if they know that the law firm's not confident about long-term hiring. They may have large institutional clients that the recruiting coordinator can bring in senior attorneys without business to work on. So they have this pulse on the firm, which is, it's actually pretty incredible when you think about it. And they know where the openings are, and they know where the opportunities are in each firm. And because of that, it can make a major difference if you can come to their attention at the right time. And as the firm gets larger, And as the recruiting coordinator has been there for a longer time, they're going to have institutional memories about different types of people that have been hired in the past and aren't hired. And they're going to know that they're going to have a good understanding of what's going on. And so this is one of the most important things. And they're always going to be working with attorneys in the firm to decide what the firm needs. And so obviously, because the recruiting coordinators in this gatekeeping role, the better relationship that you have with them as an attorney, the better off you're going to be. And frankly, the better the recruiting coordinator, the better they're going to understand whether or not you're a fit or not. And many of them do, especially the ones that have been in firms for a long time. Another thing that the law firm will do, that the recruiting coordinator will do is, and that I think is extremely important, is they'll understand, because they're advertising jobs and they're watching the things that come in through recruiting firms and all the resumes that they receive. They're going to know how, if there's certain people that are good opportunistic candidates, and they're going to be able to recognize them. A good recruiting coordinator can understand certain attorneys that are very rare and that are hard to find. And then if they do come in, they can bring them to the attention of the right people. And they can also convince the firm to hire certain people that the firm might not otherwise hire. They can go and they can explain why they think the person's qualifications are good, why they need to hire this person now, why this is a good candidate, and so forth. And they do that. And recruiting coordinators will do that with candidates they like. They will do it with candidates that come through recruiters that they trust and that they like. They'll do it with people that they believe are going to be hard to find in the future. And so they have a lot of power. If you're one of 5 candidates for a job and that recruiting coordinator likes you a lot, then that can be very helpful. Even sometimes they just may want to promote someone like you. They may want to give someone like you a chance because something about your background suggests to them that you'll do well. Or maybe they identify with some portion of it and they want to see a person like you in their firm. And so there's all sorts of ways that people can push forward people that they like. And I've certainly seen that happen in organizations all the time. And it's a very important thing. And so recruiting coordinators too will help the law firm stop them from making mistakes. So many times law firms get very busy and they may just want to throw bodies at cases and problems. And the legal recruiting coordinator can stop that, and they can make sure that they're only hiring the type of caliber of people that they want. And then many times law recruiting coordinators will interview people as well as the attorneys, and they'll have a lot of contact with them throughout the hiring process. So they may be talking to you and calling you on the phone, and they may be speaking to you when you come in for interviews, and they're going to see how you act on the phone and how you communicate via email, and how, if they're texting you, how that's going, and whether or not you're showing up for time on interviews and so forth. So they actually play a very big role. And when they get into making hiring decisions, many times there's 2 or 3 people, and all it takes is a couple of negative or positive words from that recruiting coordinator, and you can actually get hired or not. I've seen it. They've said, this person was so nice, they sent me such a nice thank you note, or they did this, or everybody seemed to like them a lot. I really like them. And if you can be friendly with them and so forth when the hiring's going on, then the better off you're going to be if they like you. It's literally, many times, I would say a good portion of the time, their decision of who to hire can also often carry the day. And that can apply to summer associates. It can even apply to lateral partner attorneys. And they can decide who isn't a good match. And because they have institutional memory of people that have worked out and haven't worked out, they can always bring that stuff up. And so it's even better, even a bigger role even than a gatekeeper is. They're trying to maintain the brand, and they're trying to prevent the firm from overhiring. And different recruiting coordinators have different standards. I can think of the office of one LA-based firm that is difficult to get into, but it's not impossible. And then the recruiting coordinator in the New York office is extremely demanding and has much higher standards than even the main office. And so she sets the tone. And by the way, legal recruiting coordinators are both men and women. It doesn't matter. They're both do the position, but that particular recruiting coordinator sets the tone. And some recruiting coordinators, it's easier to get jobs with or get in than others. And so they really are the gatekeeper, and their role is huge in the process. And every law firm, recruiting coordinators also are very good at recognizing the people that are good and bad cultural fits for the firm. And Cultural fit can mean a lot of things. It can mean how the attorneys carry themselves. It's even things like there's certain firms that I know of where if you see pictures of the attorneys online, everybody's smiling. It doesn't matter. They're just all very excited. And there's other ones where everyone's frowning and looks unhappy. And there's other ones where everyone likes to play sports, and there's other ones where no one plays sports, or it's just that there's different types of cultures that firms have. And so a good recruiting coordinator understands and can recognize different cultures that firms have, and they can understand their own firm's culture, and then they can bring in people that are like that, and they can connect with them at the interview stage, and they can tell the candidates about why the culture is a good fit for them. And it's just an exceptionally important role in so many respects. And I've noticed a lot of firms will actually sacrifice their culture in order to make money. And they'll just bring in people that have business simply to do the work, or and then those attorneys will work in silos where they won't really work with attorneys in other practice areas and so forth, or other attorneys in the firm. And so a group of 4 or 5 partners may work together, or a partner and 3 associates, and they don't work with other people. And the problem is if there's not a good culture, and the culture is not held together by the recruiters, then by the firm, then people will end up leaving, people will be unhappy, and the law firm will eventually go out of business. I've seen a lot of firms where that happens, and they almost always go out of business. I don't know why. Law firms don't, they will emphasize profit over their culture, but recruiting coordinators really job is to guard against people that can threaten their culture. And that's something that they do very well. And then the other thing that the recruiting coordinator will work on is they will work on job descriptions for the website, job boards, and recruiters, and they'll basically understand the different roles of what an attorney does, and they'll put together job descriptions. And this really requires them to have a really good understanding of the type of work that attorneys in different practice areas do, what the educational and work qualifications the firm's looking for, how to make the position sound good. So they'll have to write very well, and then to make sure that they're able to sometimes communicate the culture of the firm in those job descriptions, and that writing ability and the way they put together those descriptions will determine if the law firm receives applicants from the sort of attorneys they want. And obviously it's a big skill, and so there's a lot of marketing involved, and most legal recruiting coordinators have degrees, and they college degrees and so forth, and they like writing, and they're able to understand what attorneys do and write about them, and they're able to understand the culture of the firm as well. The other thing that legal recruiting coordinators do is they're able to stay in touch with past applicants of the firm that may be promising. They may interview people and not be able to hire them at one point in time, or they may interview people and want to maybe the person to get more experience, and so they have to keep them warm and check in with them on an ongoing basis. And because not everybody is always going to be a no, they may check in with past applicants. They may go to networking functions. So a lot of times that you'll see recruiting coordinators at all sorts of different bar functions and other things, because they're out there meeting people and try to help the firm. And I know several that are very active doing that. They also will network with other legal recruiting coordinators about potential candidates sometimes that people may be interested in the market. And so that's a very important role too that they do. Another thing that they do is there's a lot of politics involved. They'll learn secrets about individual applicants, which could be former discipline problems. They may learn about problems that attorneys working in the firm are having and may need to be replaced, or having problems. And they're going to learn about all sorts of kind of secrets that the firm has. Sometimes law firms may hire children of clients and do things that they shouldn't do, or I'm not saying they shouldn't do it, but that they might not otherwise do, or they may avoid hiring people because they don't like their political or ideological beliefs. I mean, you just don't know. And recruiting coordinators have to be very aware of those sorts of things and keep confidences, and many times keep that information secret, and even if they're no longer working there, and do so from firm to firm. And then they also need to understand a lot of cues. So a lot of times people may not want to hire someone for different types of reasons, but they may not say certain things. So an example may be if they feel like an attorney is socially awkward and they want someone that's not, people may not actually talk about that because they don't want to be seen as negative, but they may talk about it in indirect ways. And so the recruiting coordinator needs to pick up on that and understand what the firm is looking for. And then also many times the recruiting coordinator will be tasked, and this is very common. There's people that the law firm doesn't want, they'll know who's on the way in and who's out and so forth. And the recruiting coordinator might have to hire people for positions of people that are actually still working there that the firm is planning on getting rid of. A lot of recruiting coordinators will actually do outbound recruiting, and this is more common. So they will use online firm directories and do research for attorneys. Sometimes they'll cold call them. Other times they'll email them and they'll get in touch with them. I know one recruiting coordinator that spends his days making cold calls all over the country, and he's very well compensated, but they basically have him doing the role that a traditional recruiter would do. And a lot of firms do that. They have them aggressively doing outbound calling and so forth. And that's a role sometimes too that the firms will do, especially when they have kind of niche openings. So there are some types of openings that law firms may have where there only may be a limited amount of people in the country or the area that do the type of work. So they'll just tell the recruiting coordinator to go make contact with them. So the position requires a lot of confidence, obviously, to do that. And they'll network with them in different ways too. The idea would be like if a law firm in Nevada needs someone that has FDA experience, maybe there's only a couple people that are in Nevada that do that. So they would contact them and find those people for the firm. And then the other thing that the recruiting coordinator does, and this, I hope you can see this, is the amount of roles that they do is just huge. They'll decide how to promote the needs of the law firm, either using recruiters or advertising or just generally branding the firm. And you can see here all the options they have when they have a position. Many times they can use their existing openings that they may have, or they can advertise it and on job sites and legal publications. Sometimes they'll do banner ads. I've seen law firms doing a lot of banner ads. They can put it on their law firm career pages. They may sometimes promote jobs widely, or other times they may not. In some cases, law firms have openings and they don't want to post them publicly. They only want recruiters to know about them because they don't want people on their own staff to know about them or competitors. So they have different ways of recruiting. Many times they are responsible for working with also marketing agencies or on their own and writing content for the website. That can be quite a bit of work they're responsible for. All this work is actually making me think about, it's a hard and very difficult job. And then one of the big things they also do is they review applications. So for you, it's important to understand that when you're applying to a law firm, many times the only person that's going to see your application is the legal recruiting coordinator. Because if you're sending your application directly to them, they have the responsibility as a gatekeeper to many cases to reject people, in most cases, to determine whether or not they think you're a good fit. They may just call you up and ask you some questions or email you some questions, and you may never hear anything from them again. And so the point is that they have a lot of power, and they can decide who's a good fit and who's not. And they can cut you off based on their thoughts about whether or not you're a good fit or not. And that's their job. They make those decisions based on, many cases, just their experience in the industry, but they can also make those decisions based on what they know about their firm. And in some cases, they're making those decisions to not hire people based on what the firm is telling them. Typically, a recruiting coordinator will receive the application either through an applicant tracking system, or they'll receive it, you'll send it to them somehow, and they'll review it. And depending on your background, they may decide not to work with you. It could be they want to hire only out of certain firms. It could be they only hire from certain law schools, or it could be you have to be at a certain position in your class, or it could be that they don't want to hire people that are relocating. And so having a very good relationship with a recruiting coordinator is important. And many times talking to them, sometimes if you can, not all of them you can, but the nice thing about a recruiting coordinator is many times you can, unlike a hiring partner, many times attorneys are not afraid to call them and ask questions. You can ask them questions, and because you have to remember they're overwhelmed, many of them, with applications. Some of them are receiving hundreds and hundreds of resumes a week, and they need to make very quick decisions. So they look for, just as a recruiter does, any type of recruiter, a recruiting firm or a law school does when they're reviewing applicants, they look for things that show that you're likely to be a fit. But sometimes if you can get beyond that and get them to, understand you, then you can sometimes break through and they may like you. And people will like people if there's some way you can make a personal connection. And you can do that often through a good cover letter and other ways as well. But the role really is to be a gatekeeper, and how you interact with them is going to really affect whether or not your resume is going to make it to the next stage. It's very important. And they need to like you. So you need to understand all this. I've seen the best recruiting coordinators hire people that don't look like a good fit, but when you get down to it, that they're a very good cultural fit. So I have an understanding in my position of the type of people that certain law firms are looking for, and people really can just decide what sorts of candidates will succeed in their environments. They understand the types of personalities that do their matchmakers, and so that's one of their roles. And they can make holistic evaluations of people, and they can understand them at a 30,000 foot level why the person actually would work when it doesn't look like they may not work. But just remember that their job really is no different than what kind of happens in a law school. Like if a law school is reviewing an application, I remember, for example, when I was applying to law schools, there were certain law schools that you knew you would get looked at very quickly, and there were others where you knew it would be much harder to get looked at, and there were others where you knew that you might never get looked at for most attorneys. So the best law firms are going to have higher qualifications than other law firms, and different qualifications, and be looking for different things. So their job really is to understand that and to open the gates to the extent necessary and to close them to the extent necessary. And then the other thing that they do is they also talk to law schools. So recruiting coordinators will often be involved in outreach to law schools. They're going to be scheduling interviews with summer associates and communicating with the law schools. They're going to review the resumes and see which ones they want to interview for on-campus interviewing. And then they're also going to review unsolicited resumes that come in with law schools that the law firm traditionally doesn't hire from. And they may choose to bring in some of those people as well. And then when you interview, of course, as a law student at those firms, they will be responsible for that. And how you get along with them is going to make a difference. The other thing they'll do is, they'll coordinate trips, for out-of-town attorneys and law students. So they're in charge of that, arranging lunches and all that related work, which is quite a bit. Hotel reservations, if the firm doesn't have a travel department, and making sure that people show up on time and so forth. And then also they plan recruiting events, law schools, and do that thing. And then also during the summers for summer associate events, they may be in charge of planning all that and organizing things. And during those events, they will watch you, and they will have a sense of how well you fit in with people. They'll have a sense of your behavior and whether or not you seem like a good long-term fit for the firm. And they're the eyes and ears of the firm. They're the eyes and ears of the firm when they're bringing you in to interview. And then the things that you do in hotel rooms, if you are ordering bad movies, they'll know about that. If you're ordering too much food and putting on the hotel bill, they'll know about that. So you have to remember that they really are the eyes and ears of the firm, and that is important. And then another big thing that they do that's you should understand is they do a lot of networking. So they network. Most recruiting coordinators know lots and lots of other recruiting coordinators at different firms around the city. So that's very important for you to understand that the quality of your relationship with them can actually follow you throughout your career. Sometimes they just like attorneys, they switch firms. So you could start off and have a bad relationship with one of them at one firm, and then go to another firm, and they later on could be hired there. But the other thing that they do is that they do have a kind of informal relationship. If you're out of work, for example, and a firm's thinking about checking your references that wants to hire you, the recruiting coordinator is going to call recruiting coordinators they know at other firms and will get information about you many times. Now, that's not something that they do all the time, and I don't know, but they meet informally with people, and they can get information about you, and the law firms rely on them to do that. And they're certainly not going to get information about you when you're employed somewhere and interviewing or anything like that and do anything negative to hurt you, but they can definitely find out about you and so forth. And most of them are members of local and national different societies for recruiters, where they network, they become interested in advocates for societal higher things that the society is interested in, like diversity or challenges that certain types of attorneys are facing, or so they can help with that, and they learn about that, and they also understand what other law firms are doing and how other law firms are hiring. And so there's just a lot of things that they do. And that's obviously, again, a law firm's main product is its people. The role that they have is hugely important. And impressing them at whatever firm you're at is important, because if you upset them or you they don't like you or you have a negative relationship with them, it will follow you in your career. And they can certainly, they do have a lot of power. And they, again, the eyes and ears of the firm, and upsetting them is not a good idea. And the other thing they can do is they have a public relations angle, so they can promote a positive external image of the firm. And what that means is they know the positive things to say about the firm. They can reflect the firm with their level of professionalism and tone and how they write and how they communicate. And that's important just as it is for attorneys. So they many times can communicate with the firm, with outside firms and so forth in a way that attorneys that gives a good impression of the firm, and whereas attorneys are all over the map in terms of their public relations skills, the recruiting coordinator will typically be a very refined version of the way the firm's trying to present themselves. And if they're difficult to get along with and unprofessional, that's not going to reflect positively on the firm because of all the people that they're in contact with. If they're very professional and easy to get along with, that is going to reflect positively. And so it's a very public and public relations related position as well, and a very important one. And then just some other things are that there's just tons of information that's coming at them. If you can imagine, if you walk by many of their offices, I mean, their phones are just ringing all the time, and it can be exhausting. But the number of applications coming in can be just completely overwhelming for many recruiting departments. And some recruiting firms have several people in a department. They may have 5 or 6 in the largest firms in big cities helping, but it's just a continual influx of people, and they need to stay on top of that. And that means a lot of that information needs to be entered into databases. They need to quickly reject people that they can't work with. They need to do things to respond to different types of applications and schedule interviews and make sure people don't fall through the cracks and get back to people. And it can be very busy and a big job. And if you just think about all the work that would go into it, it's just a lot of work. There's emails and phone calls and all sorts of things coming in on a daily basis. And then one of the final things that they do is they interview applicants. So a lot of firms will only have the legal recruiting coordinator interview people that are applicants at a screening interview level. And many times, even in the follow-up interviews, like if they bring you in for a second round, they'll have you interview with them. And so many times the recruiting coordinator may just call you and ask you some questions before a formal interview. And that actually is an interview. And they're really whittling things down to try to save the firm a lot of time. And then many times, if they like you, they'll bring you in for a formal interview. Any contact with recruiting coordinators is arguably even many times more important than your initial contact with the attorney, because the attorney may ask you to speak to other people and so forth, but the final decision may actually be made by the recruiting coordinator. And then the other thing they'll do is they'll review the due diligence on candidate before setting up interviews. They're going to check your references many times. They'll also review the website of the firm or your current employer and your LinkedIn profile and make sure dates and so forth and what you say as your experience matches up. So it's common, for example, sometimes for attorneys to put down that they're in one practice area on their resume, but really they're doing something else entirely on the law firm website. They'll catch that. They'll catch your bar admission. They'll catch the gaps in your bar admission. They'll often, if you've applied to a firm where there's partners and other people from your previous firm, they may check with them and get information. So they're really doing a lot of intelligence background too as well. And that's another big task that you should not take for granted. And if they don't like you, they can certainly find dirt on most people if they wanted to. That's not that they would, not that that's their job, but that if they're suspicious about you, they can certainly do that. And then they need to, once they decide to interview, they need to actually find people to do those interviews, which is not easy. They need to, many times you have lots of attorneys applying for jobs and then they have to get people to interview, which means they have to have good relationships with the attorneys in the firm to get them to interview. Because a lot of times people do not want to take time away from their billable hours and so forth to do interviews, especially partners and also associates. And they don't, because it interrupts their day and they have to stay in one place and be there to interview. So they have to make sure that they coordinate that. And that's actually a lot of work. And because they need to find the right people. They want to find people that they know are going to say positive things about the firm. So they need to have a pulse on the different attorneys working there to see who's going to say the right things. and they want to select attorneys that they believe are going to be the best people to talk to attorneys there. And then after that, of course, they need to solicit feedback. So they need to talk to the attorneys who interview the applicants, and then they need to take those reviews, and they need to make sure that it's summarized, and they need to communicate that. And many times it's difficult for them to get the feedback because people won't send them the feedback right away. They'll be working on other things or something else is more important. And so they need to make sure they're constantly working on getting the feedback. And meanwhile, with all this other stuff that they're working on as well, which if you start thinking about this job, it's crazy. And then they also need to attend hiring committee meetings and provide input on that. They need to know what's going on in the market and how difficult certain people are going to be to hire in the market. And that's not easy. So they need to talk about that and then and be present there, and then give feedback on different candidates. They need to be able to rank candidates. They need to be able to figure out who the firm's going to hire and out of those people and figure out who they're going to put on hold. And then many times law firms will decide to make an offer to one person and they'll put other people on hold while they're doing that and act like they're still making a decision. And it's just that there's a lot of work involved. And then the other thing is the best recruiting coordinators are also constantly doing research. So they're learning who would be a good fit. So they may learn about partners in the market that are potentially moving, and they're going to get rumors and they're going to get other information about people and people that are unhappy. And so there's a whole rumor mill that they're responsible and able to take advantage of and making use of all this information that's coming at them. And they may suddenly see 3 or 4 resumes coming in from a certain law firm in a department, and they'll know something's going on there. And so they may have an understanding of if there's for things that the firm should do. There's a lot of information that those law firms can leverage that's coming in at them. And then the other thing, as I just said, is the reference checks for new and potential hires. Once they decide to hire someone, they do need to do reference checks. Sometimes they'll speak with other people that they know. Other times they'll hire professional companies to do the reference checks. But obviously, if the wrong person's hired, that can reflect negatively on the recruiting coordinator as well. And so the recruiting coordinator does need to do quite a bit of work to make sure that the right people are being hired and that there's not any issues in the background. And usually they're very good at catching that. Most of the time, there's not really much to find. But if you have a criminal record and that sort of thing, they're definitely going to want to know about that. And then other things that they do onboarding. So that means, and they don't do this in all firms, but that just means that they're going to, when you're new, they'll take you around, they'll show you new people in the firm, they'll tell you how the firm functions, and they'll introduce you to important people. They may introduce you to different departments and people that you need to know and so forth, and try to set up lunches for you with new people so you feel comfortable. And then they'll also work on budgets. So they'll do help recruiting budgets for the hiring of new attorneys. So they may have responsibility for that. And the law firm will ask them to help set aside the funds for that. And we'll work with them to make sure that the recruiting work comes in on budget. So that means they may have a budget to hire a certain number of people in a year. And sometimes we always see a lot of hiring many times in like December because a lot of physical year ends. I mean, they end at different points in the year. Some firms' physical year ends in September, others at the end of December. But we always see a lot of hiring many times before those budgets end at firms. And they help set budgets and say the kind of budget they need to do the type of hiring that they need. And then they're also given a lot of responsibility many times for diversity. So is an important thing for legal recruiting coordinators because law firms traditionally aren't as diverse as they would like to be and as the clients need them to be. And so they always are trying to work on diversity related initiatives, which means they may do outreach to different schools and diversity organizations at schools and try to network with people that can help with bringing in more diversity. They may work with the law firm's diversity committee to develop targets, and then they may work with people that are currently diverse attorneys in the firm to try to identify more diverse attorneys and also policies and so forth for diverse attorneys, and then for bringing in diverse attorneys. And then they also will many times, a lot of them will write articles and give presentations about legal recruiting issues and internally to the firm. So they may help brand the firm in the marketplace. There's all sorts of conferences where there's local conferences in cities, there's national conferences, there's all sorts of groups where recruiting coordinators are meeting and talking about various issues. And so the recruiting coordinators are often very involved in that. And there's people that are considered kind of national leaders, and there's others that aren't in that. And so that's another big thing that they do as well. And then they also choose vendors. So there's recruiting software, there's job boards that they use, there's recruiting firms, there's all sorts of, there's testing that they can do there's HR support companies, there's background check companies, and all that sort of thing. That's something else that they do. So there's quite a bit of work with that. And yeah, in general, the most important thing is you need to understand that the recruiting coordinator really does have quite a bit of discretion in terms of your hiring. And really, no one in the process is, in many cases, as important as them because of all the different things that they do, whether it's reference checks or checking out your background or being able to compare you to other applicants or making sure your resume gets seen. And so forth. And law firms that hire the best recruiters, recruiting coordinators, often are very successful, and the ones that don't are often have quite a few problems. And I've watched many of the best law firms always have had the best recruiting coordinators and the top ones, and law firms that are having problems often don't have good ones. Their attitude and their performance is very important, and their ability to help the attorneys their work is very important as well. And I think it's probably one of the most important jobs in the law firm, and definitely the most important non-legal job. It's up there with finance and everything. And it's important. And it's something that as an attorney, you really need to understand because it's going to have a big impact on your career. And the best law firms and the best recruiting coordinators, I don't know really how to define the role. It's obviously being good at all these 30 things I've told you, but the best ones I think are always tend to be very selfless. They emphasize the organization over the firm, which is also the characteristic of the best attorneys who work in the firms, and they make the job more about the firm. And there's just a lot of tasks that they're doing, and they're dedicated, self-disciplined, and altruistic, the best ones. And so that's really some of the main things. I think I don't know that there's really much more to talk about. But it is a professional job. It's no different than being an attorney in terms of its level of professionalism. It's something that most recruiting coordinators do their entire careers. It's something that, that once you understand what they do, you obviously get a lot of respect for it and realize how much power they have in the hiring process. And just in terms of a couple points, and I'll make these fairly quick, but the types of firms that need recruiting coordinators. Originally, this role was done by hiring partners, and then it was given to secretaries, assistants, and others. But law firms that use them, they're typically a larger firm. You're going to see them in firms with many times 50 attorneys. Firms that bill hourly tend to use them. They typically have partners, lots of business. So they want the best pedigrees. They use recruiters. They do work for large corporations. And that will allow a lot of legal work to occur. They have summer programs and they pay high market. So those are some of the main characteristics. I'm not going to go too much into this, but if a law firm's smaller, then it really many times doesn't have that need because it's not just dealing with this much applicants and it's not growing. Law firms that have them typically are doing a lot of hourly billing and they have high billable rates. They want to protect their attorneys' time and they want those attorneys to be able to work on billable matters. And they typically are interested in attorneys with large book of business that throw off work to associates. And then they hire associates to do the work. And they want people with the best pedigrees many times. So the larger firms typically are most concerned about that. Not always, but the role of the recruiting coordinator becomes a little bit more complex when they have to maintain a certain type of attorney and standard. So many times in the very, very largest firms with the most prestigious attorneys working there, the quality of the attorneys is going to be very important, obviously, and they all have recruiting coordinators. And then most recruiter firms that use recruiting have the recruiting coordinators almost always use recruiters. And most of those companies will do work for large corporations because they can spend a lot of money. Most of the firms that have recruiting coordinators have summer associate programs. Most of them Also, the ones that pay a lot also tend to have recruiting coordinators because that drives a lot of work for them. And just have a couple more slides here, but the recruiting coordinator, in my opinion, is extremely important just because the recruiting coordinator is really representing the brand in the market, and they help the firm with the best talent and drive that. And the best ones are really paid very well. And there's a lot of intangibles that I think I've highlighted, but they just do a lot of very small things on a daily basis, and it's a difficult job. That's pretty much the presentation. I am going to take a short break, and then I'll come back for questions. But the only final thing I just want to say about the recruiting coordinator role is that it's a position that attorneys need to take very seriously. And as someone that deals with recruiting coordinators all day long, in most cases, I can say that they understand a lot more about the hiring than the actual attorneys working in the firm. And they actually carry a lot more power in many cases than the attorneys working in the firm. And I would say in most cases, and that means in terms of getting your resume looked at, in terms of getting you promoted, meaning pushing your application through versus other people, in terms of pushing your candidacy through once you're interviewed based on other people. And their voice is in most firms something that is extremely important and is actually can be determinative of you getting in the door and getting hired. They are gatekeepers. And so I think the mistake that a lot of people make is, they don't necessarily, they consider it more of a lot of attorneys may consider there's an administrative component to it. And because they're not attorneys, they're not the same. But that's just not the case. In many large firms, they all are attorneys, but that doesn't really matter. The point is that the role that they have in a law firm is determinative of who gets in the door and who doesn't, who gets their materials seen and who doesn't. They have so much power. They can control when your materials are seen. That many times there's applications that come in later, meaning the firm may start interviewing people, and applications come in later that are not as good, and they may just decide that we're doing this hiring and we're not going to bring in more people, or we are going to bring in more people and look at more people. They have a lot of discretion, and they can control what happens, and they can do so in a good way, and they can do in a way that benefits certain applicants over and others. And that's not to say they're doing anything wrong or they're doing anything. It's just the role. They're making a lot of decisions about what happens in the firm. And so they're really the most important people that you're talking to early in their career, especially when you're trying to get into firms. They have a lot of control. They can push people through. And my advice is when you're dealing with them, is to do everything you can to get them to like you and to think highly of you, to tell your story to them to the extent that you can in a professional way and make sure that they understand it, to be deferential to them and likable, to listen and to not tune out when they're giving you office tours and stuff, and to be really on top of it, and to give them the documents they need as quickly as you possibly can, and to make their job easier. Because if you do that, they can help you. And I honestly never realized how much power they had until I got into the current role that I'm in. And but looking back on the firms I've worked in, I can see what can do to help people. And because they tend to have very good relationships, they have relationships with all sorts of people inside the law firm. They can actually promote your career once you're there as well. They're very important people to get along well with. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then I will come back and answer as many questions you guys have about either this or anything else today. Thanks. All right. Let me just fix this. Give me 1 second here, guys. So go to questions. Give me 1 second. What's this? And let me see. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second. Questions. Sorry, guys, 1 second here. All right. So let me just go to questions here. Questions. Okay. The first question is, what other jobs can an attorney do in a law firm besides legal recruiting coordinator? There's a lot of different jobs that they can, a lot of times attorneys will they'll go into HR, but they'll also go into roles like, for example, like a COO type role, like doing other types of executive leadership. They can do marketing, leadership. Marketing is a big one. So a lot of times they'll do marketing. Sometimes attorneys will even want to be paralegals. You can do that as well. You can do scheduling. So a lot of times they'll do scheduling type roles. Many times you can do, practice area specialists. So many times we'll have them write guides for different practice areas and so forth for their attorneys. And then other roles that they'll sometimes do they'll have business development specialists. So they'll have people that are responsible for developing business. And the business development specialists, by the way, are actually pretty good jobs. I've seen people make a lot of money doing that. And a lot of times it's just writing proposals and that sort of thing. Those actually can be very good jobs. So inside of a law firm. Let's see here. Next question. What are some formulas? Let's see, what are some formulas for calculating? What are some formulas for calculating non-equity partner compensation in a small law firm of around 10 lawyers? So typically, law firms have a way of operating. Most law firms, I don't know who's on this call. This is like a law firm or a candidate type question, but most law firms work in the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds basically says that if $1 million comes in from a partner with business, for example, million in from a partner with business, then 333,000 will go to overhead. Then 330 to partner profits, and then 333,000 to the originating to the partner that's doing the work. This partner. Now that number can go up or down. There's also functions for that. So many times they will get 50% of the money for the work they're doing. And that can be 30 to 50%. And then many times 15 to 20% of what other people are doing. So this is really the most popular or the most common way that partners are compensated that have business. And so when you take partners without business in a smaller law firm, typically what will happen is your cap is always going to be, if the person's billing out at $500 or maybe $600 an hour, your cap is going to be 1/3 of the revenue they generate. If you expect them to bill 1,500 hours, that would be $900,000 a year. This is actually good information for people to learn. So that'd be $900,000 a year, and the person would get the most they would make would be $333,000. But in most cases, the law firms, if it's a partner without business, then what they will do is meaning working in other people's stuff. Most firms will take that number and they will reduce it to something like 15 to 25%. So that's really how partners are compensated. Law firms, it's important to think in terms of the percentage of the number of hours that the person's working based on your cost, because you typically need 1/3 for your overhead, because you don't know what that's going to be. That could be legal secretaries and paralegals and office space and parking. And then the other 1/3 is going to be, you need to have profits to distribute to the partners that do have business. And then you need to have money to distribute to other people that work there. And this would also be for associates and all sorts of things. So that's a way to think about it. Typically, most law firms will try to reduce this as much as possible. If someone's billing out at 600 hours, $600,000 an hour, they literally are $600 an hour and working 1,500 hours. A salary of $180,000 a year would not be unheard of, which would be 20%, and then 25% of that would be a little bit more than that. But I guess it would be 180 plus 90 would be 270. So that's kind of how you do that. But that's the main rule for how people are compensated. And it's also that way to some extent as associated with that. Okay, this is actually a very good question. There's a question here that why are law firms not hiring as many associates they used to from law school like they were in the 1990s? Now, I don't know if that's the case. So I don't have those statistics in front of me, but I know that I think there's an article that's running in American Lawyer that I was interviewed for yesterday, and that's running maybe today or tomorrow. But they had this question. One of the reasons that they don't hire as many new associates, I think, I don't know if that's a rule or that's actually happening, but I do believe that they're not hiring, that the hiring has slowed down over the past year. And a lot of that has to do with people working remotely. And I do think that there's not as much new hiring going on because there is really a kind of a fall off of new associates. So what happens is when people are new out of law school, you really don't know if they're going to work. You have no idea if people are going to work out or not. If it will work out or not, and that's an issue. And so what happens is a lot of times people will be trained and then leave. Many people want to do other things. Than practice law. And so there's just a lot of issues. And so law firms don't know that. So the only way they really can know if the person's going to stick around is when the person has been there for a couple of years and they can see. So a lot of times law firms actually prefer hiring laterals because they don't have to mess around with this stuff. And people that come out of big law schools and so forth will act like they want to stay in the law firm and work there a long time. But most of them will leave and lateral to another firm, or they'll go in-house, or they'll take another job. So that's a big risk for firms, because when they're hiring new attorneys out of law school, the attorneys are likely to leave. They're likely to go to other firms. They're likely to do all sorts of things. And the law firm will have invested in training and will lose all that time in training. When an attorney is new, so new attorneys take a lot of time. They have to be trained, and then a lot of times they have to write off their time because they're not doing work effectively and so forth. So for law firms, it's actually a lot of work. And I think back in the 1990s, there probably was a lot more expectation that people would stick around. So I think that has a lot more to it. I don't know, honestly, if there's a lot less hiring going on proportionally, but I do think that a lot of law firms would prefer to hire to do that. Let me see. Let's see. I don't know. These are some funny questions today, but they're interesting. Why are law firms reluctant to hire third-year students as summer associates? The main reason that law firms don't want to hire third-year associates is because they're expected to study for the bar in the third-year summer, and then they're expected to start a new job after the bar. So if they're just hiring a summer associate who's a third year, the person's not going to be able to study for the bar. Okay, that's the main reason. Other question: what are the most common reasons lawyers get fired? There's actually a really good article that I wrote about this, and I think if you search for that title and then Harrison Barnes, you'll be able to find it. But let me just, I could probably help you with that real quickly. Lawyers get fired. And I'll put down the article here for you. So this article is called Top 32 Reasons Lawyers Lose Their Job Inside of Law Firms. And so I would review this. The most common reason I think that attorneys get fired is just not having high hours. I think that's one of the biggest ones. And the reason for that is hours really will show your ability to get work, your ability you'll have high hours if you're doing good work. You'll have high hours if other attorneys like working with you. You'll have high hours if you're aggressive in tracking down work. You'll have high hours if you work hard. And if an attorney has very low hours, then they may be the law firm may not be making the money it needs to from that attorney, or they just may want to hire people. So the hours will show your skill as an attorney, how hard you're working. And if you don't have high hours, then that will concern the law firm to some extent. That's kind of, how that works. Let's see here. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, let's see here. This question is, I applied to a mid-sized New York City law firm a few weeks ago. I really want to work at this firm. I feel it'd be a great fit. I reached out to a partner and tried to speak to him about it. The firm didn't get back to me. Should I follow up with that partner again or try a different angle, follow up with a recruiting coordinator to show a level of interest? I don't know why the firm would be a great fit for you. So you really have to maybe think about that. But typically following up with a partner again is something you could do. I don't know if you know this partner, but just contacting a random partner is probably not going to help you. If you have really good reasons for wanting to work at the firm, many times calling the person and talking to them can make a big difference. The thing about communication is, I noticed we had a job a few weeks ago here. I don't know, it was working for, it's one of our company's top law schools that we're trying to hire someone to work in, and as a manager. So I emailed and texted a bunch of people. I don't know, a couple hundred people about it, or maybe more. I got maybe 2 responses to the email, and then the text I got maybe 120 responses. So I think that I got many more responses to the text than I got to the email, because of the fact that the text shows right up on their phone, and it's easy to see. Now, had I called, I probably would have gotten 500 responses. I don't know, maybe I sent 1,000 text. I don't remember what the number was, but I might have gotten 500 responses. Many times when you call and you express your interest that way, it can be scary, and everyone's always afraid to call. But when you call, you tend to get more responses. Texted, I would get this responses. Had I sent a letter, I might have gotten more. What about more? So the better off you're communicating with, and the more personal the communication is, the more responses you're going to be. So I always recommend, if you're really interested in something, to call. Just partner is probably going to be annoying to them. It's something you can do, but calling is always generally going to be much more effective than anything else. Let's see here. Let's see, live. Okay, I'm looking for a summer associate position, but a lot of them are filled at this point. Would it be worthwhile to try to do recon by informally reaching out to recruiters and asking if they have openings? Yes, I think that's a good idea. The best way to get a summer position, typically if you don't have one, I always recommend applying in the market you're from. So if you're in law school in Washington, D.C., and you're from Connecticut, you should apply to firms in Connecticut. And then you should also make sure you're doing a comprehensive search, and meaning reaching out to as many places as possible. So a lot of times people only apply to firms with openings, and my big piece of career advice has always been to make sure that you're applying to as many places that don't necessarily have openings, but may also have just that you know about. So a lot of times just sending letters to local firms could be effective. So I grew up outside Detroit in a city called Grosse Pointe. And when I was in law school, my first summer, I decided that I might want to work in Grosse Pointe. And so I sent letters. It's a pretty small town. It's maybe 25,000 people. And there were maybe 7 or 8 attorneys in that town. And a couple of them, like 3 of them, looked okay. And I sent them letters, and I think I got interviews with 2 of them. And I could have worked with them in the summer. And I would have been actually a very good experience. And I didn't, but I could have. And the point is that you can typically get jobs if you apply to places where you're from. They're not always going to have openings. It doesn't have to be with the biggest firm. The most important thing if you're trying to get a summer job right now is to make sure you have a summer job, because working in a law firm is much more important than not doing anything. And it makes it look like you're not interested in it. So even if you work in a small law firm that you don't think is that great, it still could get you into a bigger law firm the next summer or after you graduate, because you can always interview in your 3rd year and we'll get you that experience, because people hire people that look like they're going to be interested in the job. So I would really recommend contacting at this point as many firms as you can. And they don't have to be the largest firms, and they should be in all sorts of cities. There's a big list of firms on the BCG website. So if you search for top law firms, BCG, there's lists and firms in every city. You may have a difficult time getting hired by a large firm, and that's fine because it's late, but somebody may hire you. You can also ask for, even just say you need to get experience. Could I do an unpaid summer job with your firm? And when you apply to firms, you don't always need to say the next summer that you were a summer associate. You can just put down the dates you were employed there. And that's fine. And that's still experience. And most people won't even pay attention to it. So I would be it was me, I would work very hard to try to get, more interviews right now and do everything you can, because I see resumes all the time of people that didn't work in the summer and then got into the 3rd year. And even if you go to a top 10 law school, it just becomes very difficult to get a job if you didn't work in the summer, because law firms wonder why you didn't work in the summer. Okay, so you've been reaching out to partners for information on interviews looking for a job. That's great. And then in a recent interview, partners said I had the background they're looking for, and you would form it as recruiting. Okay, so that basically shows you right there that this whole presentation has been about how important recruiting coordinators are. And so that could be, sometimes people will say things, by the way, in interviews because they want to be nice and they don't want to disappoint you. And they just want to kind of end everything. And so if he's going to forward your materials to recruiting, what he's saying is, what that really says, and I'll just be completely clear, I do not have the power to do anything. If I could help you, I would. You, I might. You, I would. I want to end this and get you off the phone, out of my office. It could be a lot of different things. I think you should certainly, the recruiting coordinator is not going to be upset that you went straight to the partner. They won't be upset at all. But the point is that the recruiting coordinator does have control over the process now. I would just say, talk to them and see would it be possible for me to come in for an interview or to talk to you or talk to more people, and be very simple about that. They may respond, they may not. I know it's very difficult waiting for those kind of calls, but that's how I would handle it. And just remember that the recruiter really does have the power here at this point. And just because an attorney talks to you doesn't mean they have power to get anything done. Many times, even the heads of different branch offices, like I was dealing recently with the head of a branch office of a major US law firm and a partner there that had a huge book of business. And this person didn't have the power to get people hired in his office. All the hiring decisions were coming out of another office. And he didn't have the power to control the compensation, to make offers or do anything. And that's very common. It's nothing against this person that was in charge of hiring in that office. It's just how it works. And you just don't know how the power structure is. And it can be disappointing. It's been disappointing for me in the past, but there's nothing really that you can do. Let's just see here. Okay, this question, is an of-counsel attorney considered an employee? And the answer to that is yes. Most of the times they are employees. All of counsel means is it means that typically that the person is not a partner, but they're also not an associate. It's a role beyond an associate, meaning that they have the experience and so forth, but they're just not typically not accountable for bringing in a lot of business. Not accountable for bringing in business, and they may have reduced hour requirements as well. Reduced hour requirements, so they're not expected to work as many hours. Maybe typically to stay a partner at a big law firm is very difficult. So just to be like an equity partner, you can only keep that role if you have a lot of business contributing a lot of work and contributing a lot of revenue and working very hard. And not everybody wants to do that. So what they do is they make a lot of people of counsel. In some firms, the role of counsel is a very significant role. To make partner, for example, to make up counsel at a firm like Skadden Arps is exceptionally difficult. It's no different than making partner at the majority of firms. You wouldn't have the business or the same role. But at most firms of counsel basically means you don't have to be accountable for business. You don't want to have the requirement for the hours, or in some cases, you're just older and no longer want to be partner with the demands, but you still want to work. And in some cases, but yeah, there are definitely still enough counsel attorneys definitely an employee. It depends on the firm, but in most of them are. Okay, this next question is, how many applicants does a firm traditionally get for a job posting? And these are great questions, by the way. So anybody, if you have questions, just keep asking them, and I'm happy to answer them all. These are very helpful to people. So the applicants that a firm gets for a job posting are typically going to be related to the practice area, and they might have experience. So for a junior litigation associate, especially in major markets like New York City, where litigation has been very slow, it could be hundreds. So as an example, I was doing a search the other day and for openings in New York City for major firms that had litigation openings, and there are hardly any at the moment. And if I have in my database or people that I'm working with, I don't know, just say 10 people at big firms in New York it's more than that, but just say 10 people, I'm going to try to send them all to that firm that has the opening. And if I'm doing that, and that firm's also getting applicants from other recruiters and all these different places, then they're definitely going to be hundreds. And it could even be thousands for a junior commercial. It depends on the practice area, but it can be huge. And that's one reason, by the way, litigation is a very difficult practice area, because the problem with commercial litigation, most attorneys are commercial litigators. So the majority of commercial litigation is the most popular practice area, commercial or general litigation. So they can afford to be very discriminating. They tend to schools, awards, clerkships, and all that sort of stuff become academic performance, become more important than they would performance, et cetera, become a lot more important than they might at other firms, other practice areas. And then the other thing that's very popular, that's very important to understand with litigation is compared to, like, an example would be corporate or patent or ERISA or different practice areas where there's not a lot of people that have that experience. It's much harder if you're trying to be a litigator in many cases than other practice areas. When people go to college, a lot of times their parents tell them major in engineering, and they major in engineering because there's going to be jobs when they get out. They don't major in anthropology, and because you can always have a job if you major in engineering, or you major in, I knew some woman that wanted to go, I don't know, follow the Grateful Dead or something. And her parents told her this is a long time ago, her parents told her, that's fine. You first need to get this degree to be a podiatrist or something. I don't know, but that's an example of a degree where there's not a lot of people doing it. And it was a smart decision because she came out and she was able to get a good job after she was done with everything. So the point is that the more specialized you are, the better. And when there's a practice area where the person is very niche, then it can be much harder for the firm to find people. So some examples are, like, I work with, like, New York is a very competitive market at the moment. If I'm working with someone that went to, let's just say, Columbia Law School and is working at a major law firm in New York, like one of the 20th largest law firms, and they're a third-year litigator, they're actually going to be less marketable than someone that went to a third or fourth tier law school and is practicing medical malpractice or workers' compensation or, say, family law, which is a form of litigation, because those are all very niche practice areas. Now, they won't pay as much money, but the person that is more specialized in litigation is going to do better. So that's just the way it is. And in terms of the competitiveness of the job market. Do you have any, this is a nice question. Do you have any suggestions for us that want to work in a legal job that is a non-law firm job? What is the best way to search for a non-law firm job? Thank you for all you do. Well, so that's a good question. Attorneys have all sorts of skills, and there's no reason that you need to work in a law firm. Attorneys have skills in marketing, they have skills in writing, they have sales skills, they tend to have research skills, they have all sorts of skills. And what I tend to do when I got into what I'm doing now, I liked what I'm doing, and I just happened to write these things down, but I actually liked doing recruiting because I liked the fact that it took advantage of marketing skills, writing, sales, research, and other types of skills, and then business skills and all these sorts of things. That's why I liked it. But attorneys have different types of skills. So there's a bunch of tests that you can take. And let me just see the one that I like a lot. 32. Let me just say. Yeah, there's this kind of cool test here that I like. It's called, and this is something that my daughter actually took, and I took it, and I like it. And this is called 16 Personalities, and it's actually free. And it will show you the type of personality that you are and the kind of things and jobs that you could be good at. So I took it, and I came out as, it's called an advocate. This talks about the different types of standing up for what's right, connecting others, and personal mission. And so it's fun. So you take this test, and then it tells you the things you're good at. And what's good about the test is that it's based on a very popular test. I forget what it's called, the actual test that it's based on, but it's Myers-Briggs. So it's based on the Myers-Briggs. And a lot of times if you take a personality test like that, it can show you the things that you're likely to do well at. And then it can give you a sense of what you're good at, because not everybody is fit to be an attorney. Not everybody's fit. Some people are fit to be an attorney, but are just in the wrong practice area. Other people are fit to be an attorney, but maybe not in a law firm. And taking this test is a great idea. I would suggest tests like this. There's also other tests called DISC profiles and all sorts of things. But this is a good test, and I like it. And I recommend taking a test like this because it can many times give you ideas of what you want. Typically, the way you figure out the type of job you want is you think back on things and experiences that you've had in the past, which are maybe like classes you've taken that you've liked, types of things you've done in the past where you feel like you're skilled, and things where everything clicks for you. So honestly, the only practice area I ever liked was tax. I never was a tax attorney, but I actually like litigation too, but I thought tax was very interesting. I understood it instinctively. And sometimes people understand things instinctively. Sometimes people are good at certain sports instinctively. And so anywhere where you have a natural skill or something that you think you're good at, you probably do well at, and something that appeals to your personality type. And people do have different personalities. So I definitely would recommend taking a test like that. And that will tell you the things you're good at. And not every job you do has to be a legal job. You can do other types of positions as well that outside of the law. And attorneys can be very good. They can be good at sales. They can be good at marketing. They can be good at business, all sorts of things. And a lot of times the best thing that happens to people is they become something else. They do something else for their experience. Okay, let me see here. Just give me 1 second here. We'll go back into this here. Here's another question. This question is, let's see here. I'm newly licensed and worked while attending law school part-time. I've been paralegal, mostly in government, but I want to practice in a private sector firm. As a working student, I did not participate in the moot court, law review, or summer associate. So legal recruiters typically no. Legal recruiters do not help. The reason legal recruiters can't help is because they only work with people that are searching for lateral positions. What that means is that the person already has training in something, and so that That's that. I don't think the fact that you didn't do moot court, law review, or summer associate work doesn't really matter. It's the fact that you already have this experience in what you're doing. And regardless of whether or not it was government, that's fine. And 10 years isn't that long. I would recommend just basically contacting a lot of firms, and whatever your practice area is that you were doing the paralegal work, I would recommend trying to find jobs doing that. And if you don't like that practice area, then other ones. But the big thing is you need to just apply to a lot of places. And the biggest mistake that I see attorneys make, job market, is applying only to openings. You need to be applying everywhere you possibly can, into every firm you possibly can. And honestly, there's a lot of ways to search for jobs. But one thing I would just show you is I was just talking to some recruiters yesterday at our company. And one thing is that you can search for something very simple. You can search for patent boutiques in Sacramento, which is just patent boutiques in Sacramento. And this is going to show you all the law firms that do patent in Sacramento. Or you could search for patent law firms in Sacramento and that sort of thing. So you can always find, and Google is amazing because Google will actually put together these huge lists for you and give you firms. So typically when you're looking for jobs in a market, you want to make sure that you're going in and really looking to do. You need to make sure you're looking at every possible position in the market. So look for every possible opportunity in the market. And that's something that a lot of people do not do. And that you need to do. That's what I would recommend if you're newly licensed, because you're going to find firms that aren't in directories. You're going to find, I would just say use Google and other public sources. And you're going to find sources that other people aren't using. When I was in law school, everyone used the NALP directory. And the NALP is a good source of large law firms that would pay thousands of dollars a year to be in NALP. But that was how everyone was applying to jobs. And the mistake with that is it left out 95% of the firms because most of them aren't in there. And like, for an example, I clerked in a city called Bay City, Michigan, when I was in law school, when I got out of law school for a judge. Law firms which is next to a city called Midland, Michigan. So you can always, most law firms are going to be on Google somewhere. Midland's a very small town, by the way, but look at all these law firms. It's crazy. Look how many pages. And then you can even go, Bay City is even smaller. I don't even know there's a law firm in let's see here. But there's all these law firms. And look at them all. They're scattered all over every city in the country. Anytime you're looking for a job, you should look, and this is a small town. This is like, there's a Saginaw River and I don't know, it's just crazy. You need to basically look for every opportunity in every market. Everybody should be doing this. Google is a great way to find things, but it's not certainly how we find everything. And we use lists and so forth, but that break things down by practice area and lists that we build on our own. But you should look for every possible opportunity. Also, there's a company we have called Law Crossing, which has something called the Law Crossing Archive, which allows you to see firms that have had openings in the past. And so that's always good. You can search for your practice area that way and do it like that. All right, let me just go back here to more questions. Okay, this next question is, do you have any suggestions how to look for government jobs? Yes, so I have a couple different suggestions. So the first suggestion is there's a site called usajobs.gov, which has nothing but government jobs in it. And then there's also Law Crossing. And obviously I do own Law Crossing, so I'm not here. I'm actually here to talk to you about your job search. But the only reason I'm bringing up Law Crossing is because if you look there, the number of list of city governments in the United States. So you go to Wikipedia, hopefully it'll bring up Wikipedia, local government in the United States. So this isn't even a list of them. Maybe it is. Let's see. Here, God. Category, local government in the United States. Okay, so these are all the different, this is just about local government. You can see here, look at this. You have municipal judges in the United States. Actually, this isn't even a list of them. Local you have school districts in the United States, you have, and then you have general law, you have all county governments in the United States. These are just counties. So you would have county governments in the United States by state, and then so you have county government in Alabama, and then you have county government agencies in Alabama, and then you have, so all I'm saying is there are so many government offices around the country. These are just county governments. And so to look at all of these different government agencies and so forth is huge. This is something that we do in Law Crossing. It takes a lot of people to find all this information, and then each city in the United States has its own office. So all these different government offices have websites, and they typically will post their jobs on their websites. And these are just, this is crazy. There's just so many, let's see, Arizona County, and then you can see all these different counties, and they all have jobs, and then you can find their job sites, and then they all have courts, and then here's a directory of Arizona cities and towns. And then you can see each of them have websites. So if you go to this is the kind of work that I do when I'm looking for things, and you can see careers. And so they have, I want to see all jobs, I want to see job alerts, let's see jobs. And so the number of government jobs and so forth out there is astonishing. And this doesn't look like they have any legal jobs right now, but most cities do have legal jobs because they're looking for different attorneys. Most cities have attorneys working there. That's really what I would do. I would use Law Crossing finds all those, but you can also use, in addition to Law Crossing, you can use Wikipedia and so forth to find local cities, local jobs. So that's how I would do it. And honestly, when people tell me that they're having a hard time finding a job, sometimes I get so discouraged because this is what I do for a living. And I see, and I know how many jobs there are out there, and there's so many sources of jobs, and no one's really finding them. And it makes no sense to me. Okay, so let's see here. The next question. These are a lot of great questions, and just keep asking questions to the extent you have them. What are some exit opportunities for law firm partners? It depends on the practice area you're in, of course, but the things that I've seen people do in the past are in-house. If you're in litigation, you can be a judge, you can do a law school professor, all those sorts of things. So people will do, or you can go into business, those sorts of things. So there's just a lot of opportunities that law firm partners have. Those are the most common things people do. Other times people will become consultants. Some people will do the sort of role I'm in, recruiting. Other people will, you can write. I was talking to a guy this morning that works for, I don't know, one of these big companies like Lexus or something. And he has a lot of retired partners working for him that do practice area guides and so forth. You can do things like that. So there's a lot of opportunities for partners out there. And then many times, so those are some of the other things I've seen them do. I've seen partners do nonprofits and just all sorts of things. What percentage of partners at big law firms make partner? Sorry, this question is, give me 1 second. This question is, what percentage of associates at big law firms make partner? That's kind of a difficult question, depends on the firm. But the biggest law firms, it's very low. And it depends on the maturity of the law firm. And some of the factors that I think go into it that create either the answer to that question are whether or not there are two tiers. So that means equity versus non-equity. So if there is non-equity, then many times it's not that difficult to make partner comparatively with non-equity. It depends on the maturity of the firm. So more mature means been around longer, etc. It's more difficult. And then it also depends on the attorneys being considered, which comes down to factors like who your competition is, that sort of thing. One thing I would say is that, and then it depends on branch office versus non-branch office. Non-branch office. So all these sort of factors to play, but typically what happens is if you were just to join an average law firm and stay there your whole career, like an average big firm, and not bring in any business, then Your odds would be something like between, if you did very good work and you worked hard and built a lot of hours, probably I would say on average 15%, 20%, maybe a little bit higher, 15 to 25%. That would be if you did worked really hard. There's so much that goes into it. There's the economic health of the firm, there's the hours you build, there's your practice area. So it's very hard to understand that. But what I recommend, if that's something you really want, then you tend to try to learn about that stuff very early. And the only way to really make partner in a law firm, to be guaranteed that you're going to be able to be a partner someplace, is to bring in business. That's really the only thing that makes a difference ultimately of whether or not you become a partner or non-partner. If you don't bring in business, you're typically dependent on other people that bring in business for you to become a partner and what they think of you. And that can go both ways. I've seen people that are dependent on that and then they're up for partner and they're told that they did something that the firm did 4 years ago by turning down some assignment or something. If you're dependent on others and you need their business and so forth, then it's difficult. So at your most mature, your very best, your highest brand firms, unless your work is unbelievably good and you're offering something extraordinary to the firm and you're able to look like you're going to bring clients, they have no incentive to advance you to be a partner. That's just how it is. It's like anything, that the better you do, the better you do with this stuff, the better you'll be. But it's very difficult to make partner in most large law firms unless you bring in business. So that's just a skill you need to learn. But you can also get very close to people that have business and they can make you partner, but then you're always dependent on them. Okay, it seems like reaching out to partners isn't likely to yield much. On the other hand, reaching out to recruiters seems difficult because you're just another applicant in thousands of resumes. And I feel like most recruiters would not be interested in someone trying to chat with them to get an informational interview. What does a successful, aggressive job search consist of? It feels so deflating when nothing comes of it. Sorry for misinterpreting your answers. Okay, no, you're not. Those are actually good questions. So the most successful aggressive job search, you should take a look at all of my previous webinars. And my advice is honestly that you can stick out with a lot of resumes coming into a firm. But again, it's going to depend on timing and it's going to depend on that. A lot of recruiters are not interested in someone trying to chat with them. What networking is, going places where you can meet people. Networking, going places and putting yourself in situations where you're likely to meet people that can hire you. That's basically what networking is. And so the more you network, the better off you're going to be, and that can help you. And then once you network, then you will find people that can hire you. When I was applying to, and this is just these are a couple of examples, but if you're applying, for example, to a college or to a law school, you're just a number. And if you're able to get in front of people and get to know them and get to know admissions people and so forth, you're much more likely to get a job. And you can do that. Someone that's applying to a law school, before I applied to law schools, for my first choice school, I got to know the admissions people. The same thing for college. I did the same thing. So if you really are hungry and want to get someplace, you can figure out ways to meet those people. And that's what people that are driven do. They look for ways to do it. It's the same thing that partners that end up getting a lot of business do. They figure out a way to be in the location with the people that they want as their clients and to get meetings with them. So that's what networking is about. So you need to be the most successful networkers will do that. Now, I realize that not everybody is able to network, and that's something that you may not be able to do. So my advice that I try to give to everyone, and I've been promoting my whole career, is the only way, if you don't want to do in-person networking, you don't want to call, you're not putting in all the effort, the only other way to really increase your reach is by applying to as many places as possible. And there's firms everywhere. You can work anywhere you want to work. There's opportunities in Santa Fe, New Mexico, or in Taos, New Mexico. There's opportunities in Maui, Hawaii, but you need to apply to as many places as possible and then have good reasons for doing that. And that's really the biggest clue that I know of. And I've been doing this for over 20 years and I've thought about this a thousand different ways. And I think that networking is a very good way if you can meet people that you can break through. I think that works. I've hired people before that have walked into my office to hand me an application, so they'd be interested in working for me. I think that actually can work. But the more eager you seem and the more people are willing to be chances on you and take chances on you. And then the only other suggestion that I would give you is that the more places that you apply to, that's really, in my opinion, the most important thing. Because if you think about it, let's just say, I'm just trying to think of some examples here. But if you're interested in working in, I'm just going to pick a random city here and just see, and let's say you want to work in Aspen, Colorado. And I've actually placed people in Aspen, Colorado. Aspen, Colorado, law firms. And you wouldn't think, if anybody that's ever spent time, law firms, anybody that's ever spent time in Aspen certainly wouldn't think that there's law firms there, but there's tons of them. This is right here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. This is, I don't know how many are on page 20, maybe 80 opportunities. I don't know how many firms are here. There's not that many, but there's tons of them. And then there's hospitals where you can work, and all hospitals have attorneys in them. So there's going to be there's opportunities in every possible place you can work. And typically having a connection there is better. So being from a place, the firm doing a certain type of work you do, but there are so many opportunities out there. It makes me sick. There's tons of opportunities with government offices. There's tons of opportunities with companies that hire people. You just have to be able to find it. And that's what good researchers do. Good researchers research things until they make sure that they get the results they want. I'll tell you one quick story, and it's a stupid story. Actually, no, it's not a stupid story at all. But I worked for an attorney once that was fairly low key, and he had actually never lost a case. And when I worked for him, he made me research things, these exhaustive, like long memos about nothing, just about the history of a certain rule of state civil procedure or something. And I would work on these memos and putting in 80-hour weeks writing these long memos. And the thing that always happened, I didn't realize until a few months, but the thing that always happens is the deeper you look at something and the harder you look at something, the more you will find a solution. So he would always win cases and win matters by finding solutions before things ever got to trial, because he would research things better than the other people. So your success as an attorney is really based on your ability to find opportunities. And the more places you can research and find, the better off you'll do. And that was a lesson that really stood out to me, because this guy had some of the worst clients, but he would always win. When I say worst, I mean people that were accused of doing fairly bad things, whether they were companies or individuals. And he always won. And he won because he looked harder at the facts and everything when other people wouldn't. And so most people, when they're looking for a job, are just looking at the surface, and they're not looking beneath the surface, and they're not looking at enough opportunities, and they're not researching, and they're not getting the word out there enough. And your job is to market yourself when you're looking for a job. It's a test. And what would you expect if you had if you were accused of murder, would you want or something awful, and had a criminal attorney, would you want the criminal attorney talking to every single person that could possibly help you, or just a few of the most obvious people? Or would you want them researching every possible angle that could get you off, or just the one that seemed the most obvious that everybody else was researching? And so that's what a good attorney does. And the good attorneys will look exhaustively at everything. And that's what you need to do if you want to get a job. You need to look exhaustively at every possible opportunity and question everything. And that's what the best people do. Okay, let's see here. Partners at a law firm, I don't know what this question is. When partners at a law firm retire, what happens with their shares and distribution? I think they go back into the firm. They just go back into the firm. It depends on the firm. But this is actually an interesting question. Let me see here. Are lateral hires of big law firms from other big law firms? No, that's a great question. Lateral law firms from big law firms can be from small law firms, or they can even be from large law firms. I've even seen solo practitioners hired at big law firms laterally. It just depends on the practice area. So one example is patent law. So patent lawyers typically are, before they become patent lawyers, are typical engineers. And then, so engineers obviously make a lot of money. So they many times will go to law school at night. And because they're going to law school at night, they won't get the best grades. And because they don't get the best grades, they don't always get into the best law firms when they graduate from law school. Or who knows, but or they're engineers, so they think in terms of finances and go to the cheapest law school they can. So a lot of times patent lawyers will come out of school and they won't be able to get jobs at big law firms. But after a year or two of getting experience in a small law firm, a lot of them, a substantial number of them, even if they had C's in law school, will get hired by big law firms because they have the experience and they're ready to go. Other practice areas, anytime you have a niche practice area, which would be something like, I don't know, different types of tax law, different types of, sometimes very rare types of litigation, people working in healthcare for the government and things, or FDA related work, many times don't have any law firm experience when they're hired. And if they do, many times it's from smaller firms or even hospitals and things. Lateral hires at big law firms don't always come from other big firms. The most important thing, though, is if you do want to get hired from a big firm eventually, it's important that you have as much that you're as specialized as possible. So the more specialized you are, the better. And as you get more senior, specialized, the better. And as you get more senior, the more business, the better. The better. But no, it doesn't matter. Everything is a race. So when you get out of law school, the people obviously that have the best schools and the best grades are always ahead. Schools and grades, race. So we call this the race. First school. But over time, the person that pulls ahead, this person, if they have very discrete practice area, they can very quickly pull ahead in terms of the quality of firm that can work at. And if this person, so the quality that is actually the most important component in the long run. Okay, questions here. I'm almost done. Let's see. Why do law firms fail? This is a funny question. I think I do have an article on that, why law firms fail, that I've done. But the main reason law firms fail is because of finances. So what happens is typically they fail because they take out lines of credit and then they exhaust them. And then the other thing that they do is they often will guarantee partners compensation to partners that they can't pay. They cannot pay, and they usually do that laterally with laterals, and those are really the primary reasons. And then other things happen. Law firms sometimes will fail for reasons of making kind of strategic mistakes where they may have numerous cases settle suddenly and leaving them unable to pay bills. They may be closely held and partners may leave. So there's all sorts of examples, but almost every law firm that I've ever seen fail, it's always been because of money issues. And typically it's because people that have the business leave, or people that are, the economy slows down and they have large lines of credit. And they have partners they can't pay. Those people leave. Those are some of the, mainly it's almost always because of money issues. And sometimes the law firm is sued for malpractice. I saw one firm that was fairly well known in LA and can't pay cannot pay the judgment. And I thought that happened. But those are the main reasons I've seen law firms fail in the past. Okay. Talk about non-partner track. Okay, I think this is the last question here. So this question is about non-partner track. So non-partner track at law firms, you can join a law firm and you don't have to be a partner. Many times you can be a staff attorney. You can work reduced hours. You can basically tell them you don't want to be a partner, do not want to be a partner, which a lot of people will do. You can tell them you not want to be a partner, which can be helpful, and then they can keep you as an associate, and all sorts of things. Or you can become many times you can become counsel and that sort of thing. The nice thing is that many firms, if you do very good work, the firm's never going to let you go. They will. I know people that are partners that have been at the same firm for 20 years. And in some cases, at big firms, you can make $500,000 a year almost as a associate. So there's firms that will keep people around if they have the work, and other firms will allow you to become counsel. Others will keep you as an associate. Others will allow you to work as a staff attorney. Others even sometimes as a contract attorney. I've seen people leave and then come back and work as contract attorney. So there's all sorts of things you can do as a non-partner and in a firm, and that firms will tolerate. The problem is anytime you get off a competitive track where you're working reduced hours, or you're an associate, then you become a counsel or contract, then you just become more vulnerable to losing your job, because typically they do want to, most law firms want to keep around people that are they want to have, I don't know what the word is, but one word is gunners, which means they want the hardest working people there, and they want to have a culture where there's hard work. So I've had instances before where I've had really highly qualified candidates that are at really good firms, and they want to go somewhere and they want to work, but they want to not be a partner, and the law firm basically will say, no, that's not in the dice. That's not how we do things around here. Sorry. And that happens. So you just need to be aware of that. There are law firms where that's not acceptable. And so you just need to do that. But a lot of firms will tolerate it. If you do good work and you're willing to accept the compensation they offer, that's fine. Okay, I think that's about it. Let me just make sure there's nothing else here. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to just answer this question because this is from a foreign attorney, and I will answer it real quickly for them, or not quickly. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I will answer this. It says, I'm a former attorney from, this is a question that a lot of people I think have, from a foreign law school. I passed the international law school. I passed the California bar exam without sitting for U.S. law degree, and I'm now practicing good. I feel the lack of a U.S. law school name on my resume puts me in disadvantage when applying for corporate attorney business in bigger firms. The only advice recruiters for me is get a GD or be content with smaller firms. What would you recommend? I got admitted to the Berkeley LLM program. Would you pursue the route, or would I feel this fit the same challenges a year later? Okay, so this is a good question. Generally, the LLM is not the same as a JD. And so the problem with an LLM, well, I'm going to answer this question as we go through. So the first thing is you're practicing and you're having a hard time getting corporate positions at bigger firms. And I would say that's going to continue. The reason is just that the law firms like to use the law school name for their clients. I use the name client. So when a law firm puts you on a matter, they'll tell the client something along the lines of, this person has this background and went to this school and so forth. And if the school on your resume is some foreign law school, the client's going to be like, what the hell? And won't like that. The other thing is the law firm doesn't know anything about the quality of your school, the quality of the school you went to overseas, and that may concern them. The other thing is PhD is typically an academic job, an academic thing. And I don't know about where you're from, but particularly academic, and law firms do not like academics because academics sit around and talk about things and they aren't always as for. So those are the issues that you have. It may seem like a good thing, but that's one of the things. So that's a problem, having this degree from a foreign school. Now, all that seems a little bit problematical, but if you were to get business and become very hardworking and connect and network with the right people, then you still could get potentially hired by a large law firm. But my advice would be to start using your degree to build up a book of business if you just want to stay in the way you are. And the more work you get and the more business and the more expertise you get, the more you can definitely move up. And I always encourage people to continually aim high and try to do very well and get different types of jobs in the future. So that's what I would do. But the other thing you can do is that the JD is important. If it was me, I would definitely try to get a JD. It's 3 years. They might give you some credit. The JD is considered just a classical legal training. And law firms evaluate people based on the quality of the law school they went to and also the JD. The problem with LLMs is I think the LLM program is there. I don't see really anything wrong with it. I think it's good that schools offer it and they give people that opportunity. But the problem is most people that come out of LLM programs don't get jobs in the US. And it's just not considered the same because typically LLMs, the grading standards aren't as difficult, so they can't distinguish between the people coming out like they can in a JD. Like if you get a JD from Berkeley and you're in the top 20% of your class, that actually means something. But for an LLM, when it's a bunch of people that don't even speak English as a first language, they don't know what the grades mean necessarily. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, not speaking English in first language. I'm just saying that people get that degree and believe that the law firms will hire them, and they typically won't. But it's better than not having it. I will say that amount, and I'll say that. And I have seen people get LLMs and get into very good firms, but in most cases, they don't believe you're going to stick around if you just get an LLM. They think that you may go back to the country. So taking that investment of a couple more years and getting a JD is very helpful. And then they have the ability to compare you with other firms. So if it was me, I would try to get an a JD, and if not, get an LLM. And you may still be able to get a job with an LLM. I've seen people that went to like horrible law schools, just for schools that I don't even that are barely accredited, and then 5 years later had an LLM from Harvard or something and got hired by a major New York law firm. But those are US based attorneys with a JD already. It's up to you. But I would recommend, if it was me trying to get, if you really want to practice law in the United States, trying to get a JD. But if not, I would try to get the LLM program. Get into the LLM program. You still may be able to get a good job with the LLM program. I'm not saying it's impossible because I've seen people do it and I've seen foreign attorneys do it. But there's just so many issues with having the foreign degree because the law firms are worried you're not going to stick around. They don't know the quality of the work and the quality of your training. People can be coached to pass the bar because it's pretty much it's not necessarily a smarts test, but in California it is a very difficult test. But you can be coached to pass it if you study enough. But that's kind of what I would recommend if it was me. And then law firms, your only way to really show your commitment, I think, is with the JD. Otherwise, bringing in a lot of clients, you could spend the next 3 years learning business development and get very good at that. And if you were able to do that, that could help you quite a bit as well. I hope that helps. All right, guys, thank you. And I will talk to everyone again next week. Thank you.